Sora's whole life, people saw him as the fat kid. Even his teachers sighed when he panted during gym class. Even as a child, he had carried extra weight that made him the slowest runner in PE class, the last to finish basic exercises, and an easy target for teasing. Now, in his first year of high school, that old shame was more constant than ever. He lived with his sister in a small, cluttered apartment. His sister glared at him while he ate. "You're eating all the rice again," she'd say, slamming her chopsticks down. When he fumbled with chores, she'd mimic their mother's voice. "Why can't you be normal?" leaving silence sharper than shattered glass. He was not sure if she truly hated him, or just resented their parents for leaving them both behind. Every morning, he began the day by tying his shoes with difficulty, lacing them around an abdomen that heaved with each breath. His sister typically refused to walk with him, and went ahead to school on her own. By the time he arrived at the school gates, he was often flushed, his breathing heavy, and he desperately hoped no one would notice. They always noticed. Some laughed openly, others snickered behind phones. It was the presence of two particular girls, Yumi and Mina. They were in his class, smart, confident, and sly. Yumi had a habit of brushing back her hair while giving Sora a sidelong look, a small smile that conveyed disdain without word. Mina followed with her own brand of teasing, often tossing out quick remarks about his breathing or sweaty forehead. A note waited on his desk each morning. "Whales belong in oceans, not classrooms." Yumi smirked as he read it, her eyes cold. They would accidentally slide his chair a little too far when he tried to sit, or whisper behind him in gym class about how many laps he would fail to run. Sora did not fight back. He had no ally to defend him. He trudged through each day, ignoring their giggles and rolling eyes, unsure how much worse things might get. In early April, his sister took on extra shifts at her part-time job, whenever she is free from schoolwork, returning late and giving him even more silent treatment than usual. One evening, after he struggled to do a single squat in the living room, she turned on the TV at high volume to drown him out. Feeling dejected, Sora retreated to the storage room. It was a cramped space of old boxes and crates. He half-heartedly searched for any item that might help him exercise, a forgotten jump rope or a resistance band. He found only dusty cardboard, battered books, and a heavy wooden crate labeled Project Gravitron. The label drew his curiosity. With some effort, he pried it open using a flathead screwdriver. Inside lay a strange belt with a small digital display. He lifted it gingerly. A wave of questions rippled through his mind. Did it belong to his parents? Why had they left it behind? He ran a hesitant finger along the belt's edges. For all he knew, it was junk. Yet with a surge of impulsiveness, he wrapped the belt around his waist, trying to see if it still fit. He expected it to be too small, but it clicked shut. He tugged, but it locked tightly, as though fused. Before he could figure out what was happening, the belt's display lit up in green text, 1.5x. He felt an immediate heaviness. His arms dropped, his knees bent, and he barely stayed upright before crashing into a stack of old boxes. A frantic wave of panic overtook him. He pulled on the latch again. Nothing. He jabbed a side button. The display did not change. The belt hummed softly, refusing to let go. His sister, hearing the commotion, stepped to the closet door. She saw him hunched over, panting, but assumed he was messing around. She made an irritated sound and walked away. He had no choice but to drag himself to his bedroom. Even that short distance felt like hiking with a fully loaded backpack. Each breath came in ragged spurts. By the time he fell onto his bed, he was drenched in sweat. The belt screen glowed 1.5 times gravity in the darkness. He realized, with a jolt of terror, that he might be stuck wearing it indefinitely. If it truly increased gravity, how would he function at school the next day? Morning came too soon. The device still gripped his waist. Standing up cost him tremendous effort, and he paused every few seconds while dressing for school. When his sister notices him, she mutters that he should not miss the bus, and she walks ahead of him to school. He could only nod. No one would believe a story about a gravity belt locked to his body. He wears an extra t-shirt to hide the belt from his classmates. Stepping outside, he discovered that walking at 1.5x was an ordeal. The short walk to the bus stop drained him. By the time he reached the school gates, he was gasping louder than ever before. Yumi and Mina glanced his way, wearing vaguely amused expressions, as if curious why he appeared so much more unsteady. He nearly tripped on the curb, but managed to keep his balance. In the homeroom, he eased into his chair, arms trembling. His seat squeaked from the heavier load, or so it felt to him. Yumi was perched 2 desks away, idly tapping her pencil, occasionally shooting him side glances. His first real crisis came during break. The hallway was crowded. Sora tried to shuffle to his locker, but his legs buckled. He dropped to one knee, panting. A few classmates paused to stare, eyebrows raised. Yumi, passing by, arched an eyebrow and exchanged a smirk with Mina. Over the following days, Yumi and Mina's harassment took subtle forms. Yumi might call out Sora's name sweetly from down the hall, forcing him to turn and risk losing his balance. Mina would sometimes place small obstacles, an eraser or a pencil case, near his feet to see if he would trip. They recorded him to upload funny videos, thriving on his new, increased clumsiness. They used mocking titles like Whale Crash Number 5 or Whale Crash Number 6, focusing on each new fall. Sora's face always looked red and sweaty, and from an outsider's view, he appeared clumsy or lazy. He hated reading the mean comments, but found it hard not to look sometimes. Sora memorized every comment, lazy, disgusting, a waste of space, and let them echo in his head during workouts. Each word a barb he'd repay tenfold. After weeks of struggling, his legs stopped shaking. He could walk to the bus stop without falling. Where at first he had collapsed from walking a single corridor, he now managed to walk that same distance with only heavy breathing, not total meltdown. Soon, he managed to hold his own weight in a push-up position for a few seconds before collapsing. It was not impressive by normal standards, but it was progress he never had before. But suddenly, one day the belt's display changed. It climbed from 1.5x to 1.6x, then 1.7x over a few days. Each slight increase hit Sora like a new burden. His muscles were forced to work harder. Walking upstairs became punishing all over again. Every time the belt's number rose, he worried that this constant escalation would never stop. He imagined the belt's numbers climbing endlessly, 2 times and more, until his bones cracked under the weight of his own body. Despite that worry, his body seemed to adapt each time the belt grew heavier. When the belt went from to 1.7 times, he felt new pain in his joints for the first day or two, but by the end of the week, he could handle it. Meanwhile, the humiliations at school did not stop. Yumi or Mina would rally students every morning, always with a phone camera ready, waiting for his inevitable stumble. As soon as he fell, the entire crowd rejoiced. It had become their daily pleasure. Sora hated it, but he was too tired to resist. He kept telling himself that if he trained the best he could, he would be able to control his body. After 2 months, and gravity kept increasing, he realized 3x was his new normal. Still, even at 3x gravity, his body adapted, just as it had before. In the first 2 weeks, he could walk short distances without collapsing. He still tripped at times, but not every few steps. In the privacy of his bedroom, he practiced push-ups daily, aiming for just 1 or 2 more each night. The progress felt tiny, but by the end of the second week at 3x, he found that he could do 3 or 4 shaky push-ups in a row. This was more than he had ever managed in normal gravity. At night, Sora discovered a small victory. His uniform had become slightly loose around the waist. He stepped on a scale and saw he had lost a couple of pounds. It was not a big drop, but seeing any weight loss felt like a huge milestone. He suspected living every hour under stronger gravity forced him to burn more calories, making his body work even when he was just standing around. When he shared his small success with his sister paused, her eyes lingering on his waistline. "You still look like Mom," she said. But Sora clung to the hope that if he continued with this forced exercise, he might finally leave behind the shame of being called Whale. He started trying a few more exercises at home. Simple ones like standing up from a chair without using his arms or doing slight squats. Every movement felt twice as hard as it would under normal circumstances, but he kept going. By now, Yumi and Mina had an extensive library of Sora's fails. Their audience at school expanded. Some classmates began expecting comedic tumbles daily. However, Sora soon disappointed them by tripping less often. His body, under the belt's relentless load, built strength. Yumi and Mina felt cheated of bigger pratfalls. That's when Tatsu stepped into the picture. Tatsu was not a reluctant participant coerced by the girls. He was a malicious bully who enjoyed tormenting weaker students for fun. He was bigger, older, and known for picking on first years. Learning that Sora, the largest laughingstock in the grade, was no longer crawling or tumbling as easily, Tatsu decided to degrade him anew. He simply wanted to see him squirm in front of everyone, to restore the comedic spectacle he believed Sora had robbed him of. A rumor spread that Tatsu planned to confront Sora soon, though no one knew where or when. Sora, oblivious, continued his slow evolution under 3x speed. He was too busy surviving each step to notice Tatsu's glances. That same day, as classes ended, Yumi and Mina positioned themselves near the front gates, scanning the crowd for Sora's familiar slumped walk. When they spotted him, they casually signaled Tatsu. He did not notice anything amiss until Tatsu stepped in front of him. The older boy looked uncertain, but a nudge from Yumi spurred him on. Tatsu gave him a firm push against his shoulder. Sora staggered under the blow. His eyes went wide as he fought to keep his balance. He had grown used to the extra gravitational pull, and though Tatsu's shove was not gentle, Sora managed to remain upright. He stumbled back a step, arms flailing but did not crash. Yumi and Mina watched closely, hoping for a big spill. Mina even held her phone near her chest, prepared to film the spectacular tumble. Instead, his feet found their grip. He stood firm. A mild ripple of surprise crossed Tatsu's face. He had expected an immediate toppling. Yumi and Mina tried to hide their disappointment, exchanging a glance that said, "This didn't go as planned." Tatsu, uncertain what to do, stepped back. Sora, dazed by the abrupt assault, said nothing, and walked away, heart hammering with fear. He had not realized that the slow grind of 3x was already building up his ability to withstand such force. Shortly after, midterm exams ended. All the students had a 2-month vacation. Sora had no friends to hang out with, and no girl ever talked to him, so he had nothing to do. When he arrived home that afternoon, his sister was already packing. She rattled off a list of leftover chores he should manage, taking out the trash, paying a small utility bill if needed, avoiding messy cooking, and so forth. Her voice held no warmth, only mild annoyance. He listened numbly, still wearing the locked belt under his shirt. He had made countless attempts to remove it, all in vain. The next day, his sister left early with her friends on vacation, barely saying goodbye. He woke to an empty apartment. He stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, noting how his face looked slightly thinner than before, how his posture had improved enough that he no longer hunched so dramatically. For a moment, he tried once more to pry at the belt's latch. It refused to budge. With a resigned sigh, he sat on his bed, pondering how he might spend the 2-month break. He dreaded the idea of going outside much, since Yumi and Mina lived in the same district. On the other hand, he had the entire apartment to himself. Maybe this was a chance to do some form of self-improvement, though he felt clueless about how to proceed beyond coping with the forced gravity. That evening, while tidying the living room, Sora felt a sudden surge of pressure. He dropped a stack of magazines as his knees buckled. Gasping, he steadied himself against the coffee table. A whirring noise emanated from the belt. For days, the belt's hum grew louder, its screen glitching, 3.9x, 4.2x, until one night, it snapped to 5x, crushing his mid-step. A jolt of panic lit up his spine. It was as though someone had instantly placed almost double the weight on top of him. He collapsed onto the couch, every muscle quaking. The belt had jumped to 5x normal gravity. Standing or walking felt far more punishing than it had just moments ago. As with the first transition, he realized the belt increased gravity as soon as he got fully used to it. He knew he had no choice but to endure. He tried to remain calm, telling himself that if he had survived the jump to 3x, maybe he could adjust to 5x. Yet the initial hours were awful. Lifting an arm sent waves of pain through him. Trying to walk across the living room felt impossible. He considered calling for help, but who would he call? His sister was gone, and no teacher or classmate would come for his help. He spent the next few days in the apartment, forced to discover new ways to move under 5 times normal gravity. Cleaning the kitchen counters felt like pushing 500 pounds. Fetching groceries from the lobby left him sprawled on the stairs, sweating profusely. At night, he collapsed in bed with limbs shaking. Several times, he felt certain he would tear a muscle just trying to stand. But after a week, something in him shifted. His body adapted again. He could now walk slowly across the apartment without toppling. If he ventured outside, the short hallway to the elevator tested his endurance, but he found it barely doable. During the second week of vacation, Sora realized he had not heard from his sister at all. She had left a note on the kitchen counter saying she might extend her trip if she got the chance. He was surprised he felt no dread at being alone. In some ways, her absence made life less stressful. He established a routine. Each morning, he forced himself to do basic chores: sweeping, wiping surfaces, tidying his cluttered bedroom. Every motion felt like an intense workout under 5x gravity. In the late afternoon, he practiced basic exercises: push-ups, half squats, slow walks up and down the corridor. Although it remained brutal, he noticed each day that he could handle a little more than before. He stopped checking the belt's display as often, assuming it was stuck at 5x. It never seemed to drop or rise. The readout had become part of his daily existence, no longer interesting enough to watch constantly. Days blurred together. His body continued to adapt. The frustration of being trapped in this device warred with a strange gratitude that his muscles were growing stronger. He lost track of how many nights he fell asleep drenched in sweat, only to wake up marginally tougher. Start of the second month, Sora realized his t-shirts draped more loosely around his belly. A glance in the bathroom mirror showed changes he could not deny. His arms, once thick with flab, bore new outlines of muscle around the biceps and forearms. His face had lost some puffiness, revealing a sharper jaw. Even his posture had improved, partly because slouching under multiplied gravity was more exhausting than standing straight. He occasionally weighed himself on the bathroom scale. The number had dropped significantly compared to his weight at the start of the year. During the final week of vacation, he woke one morning feeling heavier than ever before. His hips, knees, and shoulders ached fiercely. He assumed it was simple fatigue from the prior day's chores, but it only worsened as he tried to move around. By lunchtime, he could barely stand without wobbling. Anxiety spiked in his chest. With trembling hands, he lifted his shirt to read the display. Indeed, the number was no longer 5x. It glowed a shocking 10x. Sora's breath caught. Somehow, at some unknown point, the device had soared to an even more terrifying multiplier he had not noticed earlier. Perhaps because he had grown used to ongoing heaviness, or because the change had happened overnight. Regardless, the belt was now imposing 10 times normal gravity on his body. He was surprised he didn't feel drastically different at first. He started doing more exercises using household items, even running early in the morning. By a month in a vacation, his sister texted that she would be returning soon. He didn't care much and resumed his training. By the end of the break, Sora had changed drastically. Though still under 10x gravity, his body looked leaner and stronger than he ever imagined possible. He tried on his old uniform and found it was now baggy around the waist. The arms of the shirt also hung loosely, revealing firmer muscles beneath. His face, once round, had slimmer cheeks and a sharper jawline. Even his posture improved, because he had learned to hold himself upright to handle the constant extra weight. 3 days before school resumed, he felt the belt tighten more than usual, and it gave a sudden click. He collapsed to his knees, worried it had jumped to an even higher level. Instead, the belt unlocked. It slid off his body and dropped to the floor. He stared at it in disbelief. For months, it had been stuck to him, raising the gravitational force little by little until it hit 10x. Now, it was off. He felt a sudden lightness that made him wobble, as if gravity had switched to half its usual level. Simply lifting an arm felt effortless. He picked up the belt, saw that the display was blank, and realized it had powered down or reset. Unsure what to do, Sora placed it in the crate marked Project Gravitron and closed the lid. As the crate latched, the belt's display flickered one last message: protocol complete. His chest tightened. Had his parents designed this torture or this triumph? Then he tried a normal push-up on his bedroom floor. Without the multiplied gravity, he felt so light that he cranked out hundreds of push-ups at an almost inhuman speed. He was stunned by the difference. He had grown used to intense weight pressing him into the ground, so now his body felt almost free. He stood in front of the mirror, noticing how his reflection no longer matched the overweight boy who had been bullied at school. The next morning, his sister walked through the door with luggage in tow. She began complaining about her heavy bags until she laid eyes on Sora. For a moment she froze, noticing that his face was different, leaner, sharper, but also that he looked as though he had run a marathon in the last 5 minutes. He greeted her with a simple nod, then resumed the slow journey to his room, avoiding any questions she might ask. Vacation ended. Classes resumed. Soon he dressed in his uniform for the new term and left for school. Meanwhile, his sister, who had wanted to walk with him, discovered that he was already gone and felt disappointed. Sora, freed from 10x gravity, walked with a feather-like ease. Approaching the school gates felt surreal. He barely broke a sweat. Students in the courtyard gave him a second glance, assuming he was a newcomer or a visitor. No one realized this boy was Sora, the overweight classmate from before. Yumi and Mina were among the many students waiting near the main doors, scanning for Sora. Their eyes locked onto him, not with disdain, but with interest. They saw a figure with a sleek uniform, hair framing a lean face, and no sign of the old Sora's clumsy gait. Yumi elbowed Mina, whispering that there must be a handsome new transfer in their year. Mina nodded excitedly, her cheeks coloring slightly. The two girls for once shared a moment of genuine eagerness. Yumi even murmured, "He looks so cool." Mina, riding that enthusiasm, urged Yumi to talk to him first. Yumi, gathering her courage, approached him with a friendly smile. She had never smiled that way at him before. Sora recognized them instantly, but they did not recognize him. His heart pounded, recalling how they had once filmed his humiliations, yet now they stared at him with fascination, ignorant that he was the same person. Yumi managed a greeting, something along the lines of, "Hi," Yumi stammered, her saccharine smile cracking at the edges. "Are you enjoying the school?" Sora, remembering every cruel note they had pinned to his desk, felt no urge to respond. He merely glanced in her direction, then walked past, ignoring the attempt at conversation. Yumi's smile faltered. Mina, lingering behind, gaped at Sora's dismissive reaction, uncertain why he brushed them aside so coldly. Some bystanders noted the scene, whispering that the new transfer seemed aloof or unapproachable. Yumi and Mina, far from offended, felt intrigued by his mystery. "He's so cool," Mina whispered to Yumi. "I wish he's in our homeroom." Yumi nodded, strangely flattered that they might share classes with such a handsome transfer. Homeroom began. Sora took his usual seat at the back, although the uniform now hung differently on his frame. Classmates entered in clusters, scanning for the rumored new student. Yumi and Mina sat together near the middle, stealing glances at him. They mused that maybe he was just borrowing Sora's old seat until they could finalize his arrangement. Sora lowered his gaze, hiding a small inner smirk at their obliviousness. Once the teacher arrived, she performed a standard roll call. Reaching Sora's name, she paused, noticing how every student looked around for the overweight boy they remembered. Yumi and Mina scanned the room with confusion. The teacher cleared her throat and announced, "Sora is actually right here in his usual seat. He looks different after the break, but please welcome him back." A stunned silence fell. Yumi and Mina's jaws dropped. Other students who had teased Jom before blinked in disbelief. The handsome transfer was, in fact, Sora, the same boy who once struggled to climb a single flight of stairs without wheezing. Yumi felt heat rush to her face as she realized that her warm greeting in the hallway had gone to the very classmate she used to bully. Mina clapped a hand over her mouth, eyes darting between Sora and the teacher. Sora sat quietly, meeting no one's gaze. He heard murmurs, "No way, that's impossible," and he changed so much. Yumi and Mina looked at each other, mortified. They recalled how they had tried to flirt with him moments earlier, clueless that this was the wail they had once recorded daily for mockery. Now that everyone knew the truth, a wave of shock passed through the class. Students who had previously scorned Sora found themselves drawn to his confident new aura. He had always been mild-mannered, but the physical transformation magnified his presence. Some of the girls stared openly, whispering that he looked handsome, that he seemed composed, and that he had an uncanny, cool vibe about him. Yumi and Mina were unsure how to handle this shift. Only yesterday, these classmates laughed at him. Now, classmates ignored old whale crash footage as out of date or cruel. Everyone's curiosity veered toward this new Sora, who refused to answer how he slimmed down so dramatically. Between periods, Yumi and Mina tried cornering him at his locker. Their expressions wavered between astonishment and nervousness. Yumi forced a tentative smile, stammering out a greeting. Mina hovered just behind, eyes darting around to see who might overhear. Sora turned to face them, noticing their wide-eyed stares. The same two girls who had once circulated humiliating videos now seemed enthralled by his changed physique. Yumi mustered the courage to ask how he managed such a transformation. She claimed they were just curious, that they wanted to know his secret. Sora, recalling how they harassed him daily, merely gave them a level look. Then he turned back to his locker, ignoring their questions. Yumi felt her cheeks burn. Mina tried to interject, but he shut his locker and walked away, leaving them both deflated. Classmates who witnessed the exchange smirked, amused at how Yumi and Mina, once so smug, now looked like rejected admirers. During the first break, classmates swarmed Sora's desk, astonished by how different he looked. Many asked about his secret to losing weight and shaping up. Yumi and Mina hovered at a distance, too flustered to join. He gave short, neutral answers, referencing no special diet or training. He only mentioned he had worked on himself over the break. Some girls admired his quiet confidence, hinting that he seemed cooler than any new transfer they'd expected. He noticed Yumi stealing glances, unsure how to approach him now. Tatsu observed from across the room, eyes narrowed. He found it intolerable that Sora garnered attention, especially from the girls. Fueled by malice, he decided to put him in his place sooner rather than later. The teacher was out of the room for a short break, leaving the class unsupervised. Tatsu rose from his seat. In front of everyone, Tatsu strolled over to Sora's desk. A hush spread as students sensed confrontation. Yumi and Mina lifted their phones, expecting some drama. Tatsu leaned over him, sneering. He called him out for acting high and mighty, just because he looked a little different. He spat that Sora used to crawl around, panting like a dog, and he wanted to see if he would crumble under real pressure. Sora said nothing, meeting Tatsu's glare with calm eyes. Tatsu's lip curled in contempt. He had expected at least some sign of fear or apology. In front of the entire class, he raised a fist. Sora, recalling months at 10x, read Tatsu's telegraphed movement like a slow-motion reel. Tatsu launched a punch at his face, determined to knock him down. Tatsu swung his fist. Sora ducked, so slow he thought, and grabbed Tatsu's wrist. With a tug, the bully crashed to the floor. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. Yumi's phone nearly slipped from her fingers as she stared. Mina recorded every second, mouth agape. For a tense heartbeat, Tatsu lay stunned, blinking in disbelief. Sora stood over him, posture calm, breath steady. The hush that fell was absolute. Even those who disliked he had never seen Tatsu so easily bested, especially by a boy once considered the weakest in class. Yumi and Mina realized they were still filming, capturing Tatsu's downfall instead of Sora's humiliation. The irony was not lost on them. Tatsu's fists shook, not with rage, but humiliation. For a heartbeat, Sora saw his own reflection in Tatsu's eyes. Not a bully, but a boy outmatched by the very pain he'd once inflicted. Something in that steady gaze unnerved him, reminding him how easily he had flipped him. Tatsu retreated, muttering curses under his breath, ceding the confrontation. Phones across the room recorded the final seconds. Tatsu stepping back in defeat, Sora unfazed. Immediately, whispers erupted. "That was incredible. Did you see how quick that was?" Girls who once ignored him began casting admiring glances. Some stepped forward to see if Sora was unhurt, praising his reflexes. Sora, for his part, felt adrenaline coursing through him, though he maintained a calm face. Meanwhile, Yumi and Mina faced a social shift. Others remembered their role in tormenting the old Sora. Now that he was admired, some classmates accused the girls of hypocrisy. Why be interested in him, only after his transformation? The final blow came when rumors leaked that they had paid Tatsu to harass him. Students frowned on such cruel games. Their popularity sank, and they found themselves on the defensive. Between classes, Yumi and Mina found him near the cafeteria, determined to speak. Some classmates noticed the tension, gathered around to watch and film. Yumi approached and stammered an apology, insisting they had only been playing around before, that they never intended to scar him. Mina glanced at Sora, her eyes wavering between fascination and fear. Sora stood perfectly still, letting them speak. Then Yumi reached out, maybe hoping to rest her hand on his arm in a conciliatory gesture. Sora's reflexes, honed under intense gravity, acted on instinct. He caught Yumi's wrist with a firm but measured grip. A hush fell over the corridor. Phones zoomed in. Yumi froze, eyes wide with a flicker of panic. In the silence, he fixed them both with a stare. He recalled every instance they'd laughed at him, posted humiliating clips, and mocked his attempts just to move. The memory of that betrayal pressed at his chest. He didn't twist Yumi's arm. He simply held her gaze, letting her see the irreparable crack in whatever they'd once pretended was normal. After a beat, he released her wrist. Yumi's hand dropped back to her side. Students around them exchanged startled looks. Neither of the two girls followed. They stood there, faces drained, blinking back tears under the scrutinizing stares.